Hello and welcome to the sixth part of the online refresher presentation for Psych 3020. And in this part we're going to be talking about APA 7th edition format. So what we found in the past is that in the Psych 3020 assignment, students often lose a lot of marks unnecessarily for getting their APA format incorrect. And so in the assignment, we are currently making use of APA 7th edition format. So what we thought we'd do is go back and look at previous students' assignments and tally up all of the APA errors that they made, and then make a video based on the most common errors so that you can see these errors and avoid making them yourselves in order to maximize your marks. A more broader question is why are we going to all this trouble of learning something like APA 7th if, for example, you're not intending to go forward with a career specifically where you might be using APA 7th ever again? And the answer to that is that there is a broader skill being taught here, which is the ability to follow rules, comply with rules in sufficient detail. Okay, so in many aspects of work and life, be able to work out what the rules are in a given situation, in a given context, and understand how you might need to comply with them is a very important skill. And just to give one example, let's say you go ahead with your house and you build a 100-meter tall fiberglass banana on top of your house, and then you discover that there's a building regulation that means you now have to dismantle your banana and cop a hefty fine. So just a simple example of how compliance with rules is important in pretty much every aspect of everyday life. And yeah, you only have to look at all the people in prison to see why breaking the rules can be a bad idea. Right. In general, in terms of graduate attributes, being able to demonstrate that you can follow guidelines and rules where appropriate, and that you have that sufficient attention to detail, they are exactly the sort of things that are useful in pretty much every sort of job. In addition to this, of course, many of you will actually need to write an APA format in the future, so a significant proportion of you will be going on to fourth year, doing postgraduate work and working professionally in situations where APA format is required, and therefore is useful to be able to know it. And look, while nobody's going to die as a result of failing to comply with APA requirements, the problem with when you don't comply with them, it makes you look bad. It makes you look like someone who is ignorant, who can't follow really simple instructions. It makes you look slapdash. It looks like you don't care about your work. And the thing is, if you, let's say you submitted an assignment where the actual content of your assignment might be wonderful, but you have failed to comply with basic APA requirements, it gives the reader the impression that you can be bothered, that you're a bit slapdash, and that will bias how they read the actual substantive content of your writing. Okay, so presentation matters. Worth making a quick note here is that in APA 7th, unlike previous formats, there's actually a student-specific format that we're going to use that's what we're going to use in this presentation and for your assignment. But there is a slightly different format for academic papers, where, for example, the academic paper version requires a running head, which is not required on the student-specific version. So just so you know that. Right, one key bit of advice with the Psych 3020 assignment is that we've used 4 model assignments from previous students, where we've taken these previous ones where the students themselves have fixed them up, and we have gone and converted them all into APA 7th format. And so there are 4 of these, and you can get them all through assessment and the assignment materials on Blackboard. And one of the best bits of advice in terms of making sure you do comply with APA 7th is just to see whether the formatting of your own assignment matches the formatting you can see in those examples, and if they do, then the chances are that you are following APA format, 7th edition format appropriately. Okay, so that's a strong bit of advice. Do go and check out and read those example assignments. Okay, it's also a good idea from the point of view of understanding the assignment itself. In addition to this, here's a couple of online links where they've basically boiled down the key ingredients of APA 7th for you. 2 links here where you can just go and, if you want further details on APA 7th. Okay, we're not covering everything in this presentation. In this presentation, we're focusing primarily on the bits that previous students have lost marks for in their 30/20 assignment. Issue number 1. Are you using the preferred font for APA 7th? Okay, so this one, so easy to get it right. Just use Times New Roman 12 point. Okay, so in 7th edition, there is more flexibility with fonts than there has been in previous editions. Okay, but and you can see a list of acceptable fonts there. Times New Roman 12 point. Not 11 point, Arial 11 point, not 12 point, and then some other ones, Calibri and so forth. But generally, Times New Roman and Arial are the preferred ones. If I were you, I would just stick with the font that's in the assignment template already for your 30/20 assignment, which is Times New Roman 12 point. Okay. So, and the key thing is being consistent. So if you start off with 12 point Times New Roman, stick with it all the way through. Switching styles looks bad and is not appropriate. Right, so this isn't just for body text, this is for everything. So title page, your headers, figure titles, table titles, everything. Okay, we've got a couple of true and false questions here. So question number 1, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, 11 point Times New Roman font is required. This is false. It's false on 2 levels. So first level is that the actual preferred font is 11 point, is 12 point, not 11 point for Times New Roman. And the second thing is that with APA 7th, Times New Roman is no longer a requirement, it's just a preference. Second question, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, Times New Roman is one of the preferred fonts. That is true, it is. Okay, one thing to note is in your 30/20 assignment, we're using this application form template, which you'll find out a bit more about when we get to the assignment briefing. But just to note that the title page that we're using as part of that template doesn't conform to APA 7th. Just so you know, we're trying to create an application form that maps on to what you might meet if you are filling out a research proposal in real life. Okay, but more on that when we get to the assignment briefing. Okay, second key thing that students lose marks on is getting your headings in the correct format. So first thing up for APA 7th is all of the levels of header need to be bold. And APA 7th allows for 5 different levels of header. To be honest with your assignment, it'd be amazing if it'd be weird if you went beyond 3 levels of header. Okay, but there are 5 on offer. So don't go to 6 levels. Right, so specifically for the 30/20 assignment, the level 1 headers are just the section headers, which are actually there already for you in the template. So things like executive summary. So just leave those as they are, okay? And those don't conform to APA 7th because of the application form sort of template that we're using that I already mentioned. But just for your reference, in other situations when you're going full on APA 7th, then these level 1 headings should be centered. They should be in bold. Every major word should start with a capital, and they should be in the same size font as everything else. So whatever you do, don't do that word thing where you make your level 1 headers like 3 times the size of everything else, because that is not APA 7th. Your level 2 headers, so this is what you might be using within your assignment for when you want to break up each section into a subsection. Okay, and that might be, you don't have to do that, but it's might be a good idea if you think it will improve the readability of your assignment. So level 2 headers are aligned flush to the left, no indent, and they are bold. Every major word starts with a capital letter and it's in the same size font as everything else. And the text starts on a new different line following the header. Level 3 headers are aligned flush to the left, no indent, they're bold, and they are in italics. Every major word starts with a capital and it's the same size font as everything else. Text following the heading will be on a new line afterwards, not on the same line. Okay, make sure you get level order of the headings correct. Okay, so what we mean by this is that if you are using, for example, a level 3 header, then it should be part of a section with a level 2 header. Okay, so that is every level 3 header, there should be a level 2 header before it. Likewise, if you're using a level 2 header, there should be a level 1 header before it. Okay, so each of the levels should be like a subset of the level above it, as it were. Okay, questions. True or false when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines? All headings should be bold. That is true. Okay, and what we've got here is a little handy lookup table for you. If you do want to go crazy and go to all 5 levels of heading, showing how each one should be formatted. So we've already talked about levels 1 to 3. Level 4, this time you indent it, you make it bold. Using title case, you use a period, and the text this time starts on the same line, just as you can see here in this example, it doesn't start on a new line. 5th level headers, so it would be very, very rare. I can imagine you would get down to level 5 headers, but yeah, indented, bold, italics, title case, period, and the text is starting on the same line. True or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, level 2 headings are centered on the page. This is false. They are left aligned. Second question. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, level 3 headings are indented and italicized. Okay, so that is false. They are italicized, but they are not indented. Okay, as we can see from that table. Okay, now let's talk about another issue, which is paragraph formatting. So a few things to keep your eye on here. So first one is to, whatever you do, use strict double spacing throughout. So no single spacing, no 1.5 spacing. It's got to be double spacing throughout. And this is where you've got to be if you're using Microsoft Word. Sometimes in some of its default things, it likes to stick like a little extra space before and after particular paragraphs. Okay, you need to go in, click on the paragraphs tab in Word and set where it says before and after, set those to 0 to stop it sticking in extra spaces, because that will be violating APA 7th edition guidelines. Okay, so that is, there shouldn't be any extra space between paragraphs apart from the double spacing. Okay, so that's the second point. Never insert an extra blank line between paragraphs. The only thing that should be between paragraphs is your double spacing, which is between every other line as well. APA 7th guidelines suggest you only have 1 space after each full stop and 1 space between words and after commas. So this is slightly different from previous editions where they suggested 2 spaces after a full stop. So only 1 space after each full stop. Paragraphs should have the first line indented, about 1.25 centimeters, with the exception of the abstract, or in our case, in the case of the assignment, the executive summary, which should not be indented. Okay, the text body has got to be left aligned, and not justified. So left aligned means it looks like pretty much the writing you can see on this slide here, where everything is a spaced line flush with the left, and on the right hand side you can see it's sort of jagged, it's not lined up on the right. Okay, so what you don't do is justify it, where if I justified this, that would be where you choose it so it spaces out the words, so you end up with a sort of a line along the right hand side as well. So just don't do that. Okay, and page margins should be 1 inch wide all the way around, and never use numerals at the start of a sentence. Okay, so if you're going to start a sentence with a number, you've got to spell out that number in words. Okay, true or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you must leave an extra blank line between paragraphs. That is false. Never leave extra blank lines between paragraphs. The only thing that should be between the paragraphs is your normal double spacing that's between every other line as well. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should indent all paragraphs except the abstract or executive summary. That is true. Third question, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should double space your lines. Absolutely. So you've got to follow this strictly. So it doesn't mean 1.5 spaces, never use single spacing. It's got to be exactly double spacing. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should put 2 spaces after each full stop. No, it should be 1 space. That's false. So 2 spaces is for previous editions. And one little point there that I forgot to mention. Examples, such as example items from a scale, should appear in quotation marks instead of italics. Okay, so use quotation marks when you're, so for example, quoting questions from your questionnaire scale, which is the sort of thing you might be doing in your assignment. Put those in the quotation marks. Do not just italicize them. Right, next issue with APA 7th, which is actually more of a new thing with APA 7th. It hasn't been, as far as I can remember, mentioned in previous editions, is to be mindful of your language when you're talking about groups of people, and specifically specificity levels, inclusivity, and making sure your language is bias free. Okay, what do we mean by specificity? So when you're describing groups of people, you should try and be as appropriately specific as you can be. So for example, it could be that you are sampling a group of participants, and maybe in the past we might have just described the whole lot of them as just being Asian participants. Okay, these days we might be more specific if that's appropriate, and say our participants were Chinese, Indian and Thai, for example. Okay, with the idea that Asian is just it's unnecessarily generic. Okay, second point, which again is a new thing for APA 7th, is the use of they or their as a gender neutral pronoun when referring to just one person has been endorsed. Okay, so that is example. I'll just use the example here. We write something like, if someone, that is one single person, so we're talking in the singular here, if someone despises Queenslanders, then they are a bigot. Okay, so we're using they as to refer to the singular, a single person in this case. Okay, and that's, so what we wouldn't say, which we might have said in the past, is if someone despises Queenslanders, then he or she is a bigot. Okay, and the issue with using he or she is that, of course, there might be some people out there, well, there are some people out there who neither identify with he or she. Okay, so yeah, it's appropriate to use they in this context, and at least according to Merriam-Webster dictionary, I notice I said that they are in that sentence rather than they is. Okay, so the idea is that is considered acceptable in this context, even though R is usually reserved for plurals. In this context, even though we're talking about a single person, R is appropriate, and this is simply because they is sounds silly. Okay, third issue in terms of sort of this time, bias-free language and inclusivity and all that stuff, is that when you're just identifying people or identifying groups of people, we want to use descriptive phrases rather than now what's considered a significant sin, which is to apply adjectives as nouns. Okay, and I think that's easiest explained with a bunch of examples here. Okay, so in the past we might have said, here's a group of epileptics. Okay, so that is using what's a descriptor, sort of epileptics, but we're using it as a noun. Okay, and so these days we might say people with epilepsy rather than just calling them epileptics. Likewise, we might say, instead of saying transsexuals, we might say transgender individuals, or instead of saying the poor, we might say people living in poverty. Okay, so yeah, there you go. True or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, using broad categories to describe people is always preferred over providing specific characteristics. That is false. Okay, we want to be as specific as we can be, as is appropriate given the context. Second question, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should avoid using they as a pronoun when referring to one person. This is false. They as a pronoun when referring to one person has been officially endorsed by APA 7th as being appropriate. And third question, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you avoid using adjectives as nouns when describing groups of people. Yeah, that's true. So that's a third point there. You want to instead try and use descriptive phrases. So you're not saying, to avoid the labeling of people as something that might be attributed to them. Right, so now we're going to talk about in-text citations when you're sort of referring to references in the body of your text. Okay, so first up, if you've got lots of references that you're citing all at once, then you put them in brackets in alphabetical order, and they've got to be separated by semicolons, as you can see in the example here. Okay, so what you don't do is put them in, say, chronological order, and what you don't do is separate them, say, by commas. Okay, second point, ideas and concepts. If you've got ideas and concepts that you want to put in brackets, and then you've got a citation that refers to that is a go-to point for that idea and concept, then you stick it in a bracket with a semicolon. Okay, so yeah, easiest to show in an example. At the end of a sentence, I say something like, "Hazard perception tests are very cool," semicolon, and then the reference that supports that statement. Okay, so something like that. If you've got citations using 3 or more authors, then you just have only put the first author's name, and then you stick et al. And this is even for the first mention. So in previous editions, you did something different for the first mention than subsequent mentions. So that's all old hat now. Now you would say, so you've got, if there's a paper by, for example, Chan, Brown and Horswill, published in 2021, then you write it in your text as Chen et al. 2021 all the way through every time you refer to it, even the first time. If you've got 2 authors of a paper, then you do put both names, and if they're outside brackets, you use the word and to separate the 2 names. If they're inside brackets, you use an ampersand to separate the 2 names. Okay, and finally, make sure if you're quoting something from a source that has page numbers, then make sure you include the page numbers as part of that quotation. Okay, when referencing that quotation. Okay, true or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, if you are citing multiple references at once, then they should go in chronological order. Okay, this is false. They should go in alphabetical order, which is what the next question says. When writing an APA 7th edition guidelines, if you are citing multiple references at once, they should go in alphabetical order. That is true. Third question. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should use et al. For the second citation onwards of a reference with 3 or more authors, but list all authors the first time. Nah, so that's false. That's what's happened in earlier editions, but not in APA 7th. And fourth question. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, you should separate multiple citations using semicolons. That is true. So use semicolons, don't use something else like commas. Now let's move to the actual reference section. So the thing that goes at the end that lists all of the references you have cited. Okay, so in this reference section, when you have the author's name, it should always be last name, then a comma, and then the author's initials with full stops after each one. So Horswill, comma, space, M dot, space, S dot. Okay. When you put the article title, then you only capitalize the very first word of the title, unless there's another word that is immediately following a colon, or unless there's a proper noun in there. For journal names, then you capitalize every letter at the start of major words for journal titles. Don't abbreviate the journal title, which is what they do in other formats, but not in APA 7th. And your journal name should be all in italics. The volume number of the journal should also be in italics. And for the whole section, you want to use a hanging indent. Okay, so about half an inch. Okay, and if you don't know, hanging indent is where the first line would be flush left, but then the subsequent lines would be indented. Okay. All right, so don't put blank lines between references apart from all the usual double spacing. Remember to include page numbers of articles where appropriate. Also, these days, virtually all journal articles and books have a DOI, digital object identifier, associated with them. So not every single one. So especially older articles won't have one of these. But if they do have one of these, you must include it. Okay, these are formatted slightly different from previous version APA editions, where you want to format it as a clickable URL, and it needs to and also hyperlinked. So the idea is someone can click on it and it takes them straight to the reference online. Okay, so if these are available, they must be included. It's mandatory. Okay, even if you didn't ever get close to the digital version of the thing, even if you looked at a paper version, you still got to have the DOI just to make it easy for your reader to access the stuff you are citing. Okay, true or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, the author name should be written as last name, comma, first name in the reference list. This is false. Okay, it's not last name, first name, it's last name, initials. Question 2. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, capitalize the first letter of every word of the article titles in the reference list. Okay, so no, that's false. You only have to capitalize the first word of the title in your reference list. Question 3. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, only capitalize the first word of the journal name. This is false. No, you want to capitalize every major word in the journal name. Fourth, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, the journal name and volume number are italicized. That is true. Then when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, use first line indents in the reference list. That is false. No, you want to use sort of that hanging indent style. where the first line is not indented but all the subsequent lines are indented. And finally, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, including the DOI of articles and books in the reference list is optional. That is false. It is mandatory. Okay, if it's got one, you've got to put it in. Right, a couple of other things. So, when you're referencing things that have a publisher, like books, for example, or often you see this also for, say, technical reports. In the past, we've always included the publisher location in the reference list, and in 7th edition, we no longer do this. Okay, so you just put the publisher name, you don't say where they are based. And you can give up to 20 authors for a single reference. So remember, this is for the bit at the end of this is a reference list. This is not the citation in the text where you're only allowed 2. Okay, so up to 20 are given in a single reference. If you get more than 20, then you can just stick some dots in, like you can see in this example here. Web page titles are italicized, and you include the name of the website if you want to reference a website. And if you're referencing an ebook, then you include the publisher, but you don't list the specific format that you access that ebook on. So you don't say, oh, I've got this ebook and it was on Kindle. Okay. True or false? When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, the location of the publisher appears before the publisher's name. So that is false. We no longer mention the location of the publisher at all in 7th edition. Question 2. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, only up to 7th authors appear in a single reference in the references list. That is false. We can have up to 20 authors appear. When writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, website names should not be included for web pages in the reference list. That is false. Website names should be included. And finally, when writing using APA 7th edition guidelines, the format, platform or device used to access an ebook, so for example Kindle, always needs to be provided in the reference list. This is false, okay? And that's because nobody cares whether you looked at it on a Kindle or on something else. Okay, that is the end of the online refresher presentation. Hope you found it useful, and best of luck in the quiz in which this is all going to be tested. So thanks very much and goodbye.